Steal away, steal away, steal away to Jesus. Steal away home. I ain't got long to stay here.
The prejudices ingrained in the public over the centuries of slavery seem to have created an insurmountable obstacle to a completely integrated society. This idea would be challenged and overthrown by one of America's fiercest opponents of slavery. Born in Massachusetts in 1805, William Lloyd Garrison joined ACS in his 20s, but over time became disenchanted with their goals. What originally seemed to be a genuine desire to free slaves and provide them with a better life now seemed to Garrison to be more about pushing free blacks out of the country, where they would not pose a threat to lower-class white workers. In 1831, Garrison published his first edition of the anti-slavery newspaper, The Liberator. In the inaugural issue, he wrote,
"Assenting to the self-evident truth maintained in the American Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, I shall strenuously contend for the immediate enfranchisement of our slave population." In Park Street Church on the 4th of July, 1829, in an impassioned address on slavery, I unreflectingly assented to the popular but pernicious doctrine of gradual abolition. I seized this opportunity to make a full and unequivocal recantation, and thus publicly to ask pardon of my God, of my country, and of my brethren the poor slaves, for having uttered a sentiment so full of timidity, injustice, and absurdity.
In the pages of The Liberator, Garrison called for the immediate emancipation of all slaves in America. He would continue publishing his weekly paper until the end of the Civil War. Garrison helped found the New England Anti-Slavery Society and the American Anti-Slavery Society, and became recognized as one of America's most radical abolitionists. He called the U.S. Constitution a pro-slavery document, and in 1844, he publicly burned a copy. He also called for the breakup of the Union so that the North would not be tied to Southern slavery. He even advocated against voting, believing it would be participation in a government corrupted by slavery.
I am aware that many object to the severity of my language, but is there not a cause for severity? I will be as harsh as truth and as uncompromising as justice. On this subject, I do not wish to think or to speak or write with moderation. No. No. Tell a man whose house is on fire to give a moderate alarm. Tell him to moderately rescue his wife from the hands of the ravisher. Tell the mother to gradually extricate her babe from the fire into which it has fallen. But urge me not to use moderation in a cause like the present. I am in earnest, and I will not equivocate. I will not excuse. I will not retreat a single inch, and I will be heard.
He was heard. Garrison also promoted women's suffrage and demanded that women be allowed to take leadership positions in the abolitionist movement. Garrison became a mentor to other abolitionists, some of whom would rise as high as he, or higher, within the movement.
In the month of August 1841, I attended an anti-slavery convention in Nantucket, at which it was my happiness to become acquainted with Frederick Douglass. Having recently made his escape from the Southern prison house of bondage, I shall never forget his first speech at that convention. The extraordinary emotion it excited in my own mind, the powerful impression it created upon a crowded auditory, completely taken by surprise, the applause which followed from the beginning to the end of his felicitous remarks. I think I never hated slavery so intensely as at that moment. It is certainly a very remarkable fact that one of the most efficient advocates of the slave population now before the public is a fugitive slave in the person of Frederick Douglass.
Garrison would not be the only one struck by the power of Frederick Douglass's words. Born into slavery in Maryland in 1818, Douglass fought to learn to read and write as a child. He described the experience.
I lived in Master Hugh's family for about 7 years. During this time, I succeeded in learning to read and write. In accomplishing this, I was compelled to resort to various stratagems. My mistress was a kind and tender-hearted woman, and in the simplicity of her soul, she commenced, when I first went to live with her, to treat me as she supposed one human being ought to treat another. Very soon after, I went to live with Mr. and Mrs. Odd. She very kindly commenced to teach me the ABCs. And after I learned this, she assisted me in learning to spell words of 3 and 4 letters. Just at this point of my progress, Mr. Odd found out what was going on and at once forbade Miss Odd to instruct me any further, telling her, amongst other things, that it was unlawful, as well as unsafe, to teach a slave to read. To use his own words, he said, "A nigger should know nothing but to obey his master, to do as it is told to do. Learning would spoil the best nigger in the world. If you teach that nigger how to read, there would be no keeping him. It would forever unfit him to be a slave."
As his master had predicted, reading opened doors in Douglass's mind, leading him to regret evermore his condition as a slave.
And the more I read, the more I was led to abhor and detest my enslavers. I loathed them as being the meanest as well as the most wicked of men. I would at times feel that learning to read had been a curse rather than a blessing. It had given me a view of my wretched condition without a remedy. In moments of agony, I envied my fellow slaves for their stupidity. Anything, no matter what, to get rid of thinking.
He was seldom punished physically and always had enough food to eat. But deaths and family squabbles among his owners led him to be changed hands several times. Perhaps serving relatively kind masters, perhaps suffering brutal mistreatment. His longing for freedom did not end, and in 1838, he took his chance. At the time, he was in Baltimore.
In the early part of the year 1838, I became quite restless. I could see no reason why I should, at the end of each week, pour the reward of my toil into the purse of my master.
Douglass, now free, married Anna Murray, a free black woman he had known in Baltimore. They moved to New Bedford, Massachusetts, where he found work and subscribed to Garrison's weekly Liberator.
The paper became my meat and my drink. My soul was set all afire. Its sympathy for my brethren in bounds, its scratching denunciation of the slave owners, its faithful exposure of slavery, and its powerful attack upon the upholders of the institution sent a thrill of joy through my soul, such as I had never felt before.
Soon Douglass joined the abolitionist movement and made the speech that introduced him to Garrison. He gave another speech at the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society's annual convention, which led to his being asked to become a lecturer for the society for 3 years. Thus was launched the career that would make him famous across the nation and around the world. For years, Garrison was a mentor to Douglass, writing the introduction to Douglass's best-selling autobiography in 1845. In 1847, Douglass began publishing his own weekly anti-slavery paper, the North Star, and his views on abolition began to change.
Upon the reconsideration of the whole subject, I became convinced that there was no necessity for dissolving the union between the Northern and the Southern slaves. That to seek this dissolution was no part of my duty as an abolitionist. That to abstain from voting was to refuse to exercise a legitimate and powerful means for abolishing slavery. And that the Constitution of the United States not only contained no guarantees in favor of slavery, but on the contrary, it is, in its letter and spirit, an anti-slavery instrument, demanding the abolition of slavery as a condition of its own existence, as the supreme law of the land.
Garrison saw this change of position as a betrayal of their cause and suggested that it was prompted by a desire to increase sales of Douglass's paper. The disagreements between the two grew bitter and public and resisted all efforts at reconciliation. Even the famed writer, Harriet Beecher Stowe, tried and failed to bring the two former friends back together.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to help us produce more compelling historical content like this, please like, comment below, and share this video with fellow history buffs. And of course, be sure to subscribe to help keep history happening.